Hi everyone, welcome back to Portuguese. In this video we are going to look at our consonant sounds in Portuguese and how consonants are spelled. And Portuguese, the consonant rules are very similar to the other Romance languages, as hopefully we'll see, but there are some differences, so we will look at those as well. The first sound we're going to look at is the k sound, written with a K, k, and this is pronounced ka, and just as every other Romance language, we're not going to use a K in Portuguese, we're going to use a C, especially at the beginning. So we're going to spell it with a C, and again, this is because it's usually the way it's spelled in Romance languages, including French and Latin. Latin is sort of like the mother of the Romance languages, but Spanish, Italian, they all utilize a C for the k sound. So Portuguese will follow that pattern, so it's going to use a C. Usually it's going to be a C before an A or an O because the C can still be hard. If the C is before an E or an I, we know the C is going to become soft. It's going to be S. So the C is going to be before an A or an O. We usually don't have many words with CU, even though this could work. So before an A or an O is the best time to use a C. If it's an E or an I, we're going to use QU, just like the other languages, like French. QU, it's going to be before an E, the spelling E, or an I. And I don't think we have many Portuguese words with QUE, but we do have a couple with QUI. So let's look at some examples. With the C, we have karaoke. Karaoke. Here we have our C for the K sound preceding an A, because we are allowed to have a C before an A, and that happens again towards the end, C and A. Karaoke. And example with QU is cavaquinho. Cavaquinho. See, we still have our C before an A, so that's another good example. But we have an I here, so we have to have QU. So cavaquinho. Cavaquinho. Okay, so pretty simple in Portuguese, and this will work most of the time. Okay, so that's the K sound. And now we can look at another pretty simple sound in Portuguese, which is the F sound. F, written with an F, F. And the rule in Portuguese is very simple. It's usually going to be spelled just with an F. So usually it's going to be an F. Now we know that most Romance languages don't like PH. Greek does. We know Greek does because the H's are very big in Greek, but most Romance languages, including Portuguese, are not big on PH. So usually it's going to be an F, and rarely it's going to be a PH. Very rarely. There's probably less than 5 words. Rarely PH, especially if there's a root in the word with a PH. So especially if there's a root, and we'll look at an example, especially if there is a root word or a cognate word that we realize or recognize. So with an F we have fazenda, fazenda. Okay, we have our nice F there. And PH there's elephanta, which you might recognize comes from elephant, and that's the reason we have PH. So very, very few words with PH. This might be the only one actually. So it'd be best to look up the Portuguese words with PH, and once you know those, everything else is going to be an F. Okay, so that's the F sound for us. And now we're going to go to the next sound, which is the G sound, the hard G sound, which is written just a G. Now this is pronounced G, G, and in Portuguese, usually it's actually going to be a GU. Usually it's going to be a GU, and this is especially going to precede an E or an I. Usually before an E or an I. Again, the reason is the same. It's because the G needs to be hard. So before an E or an I, we can't have just a G because it would make the G soft. So we need a GU to make it hard. So usually before an E or an I, this holds true pretty much all the time in Portuguese. Example of this is Serengeru. Serengeru. Here's our EI, which is very common in Portuguese, and because we have that vowel combination, we're going to use GU for the G sound. Now, usually we're not going to have a lot of Portuguese words with G, like the G sound before A or O, so best thing to know is if you have an E or an I after, which you will most of the time, you're just going to use GU for Portuguese. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Our next sound, cruising through this, is the S sound, the S sound essentially, S. And here's where it gets a little different in Portuguese. Usually, we're going to keep it simple. It's going to be an S, especially at the beginning. Usually an S. However, Portuguese, just like French, utilizes the cedilla, which is the C with this little symbol coming like at the bottom. And this sound is basically the S sound. So sometimes you can have a C with a cedilla before A or O in Portuguese. So sometimes, this doesn't happen too often, but it might. Sometimes you're going to have C with a cedilla, okay? Like in the French word garçon, it's Garcon, garçon meaning boy. The C has a little mark at the bottom, somewhat like that, and that's a cedilla, and it makes the C soft. So sometimes Portuguese will have that C with the cedilla before A or O. And our main concern usually when there's A or O is, oh my god, the C is going to be hard. But here it's not going to be hard because we have cedilla. So you can have words with CA or CO pronounced sa or so. And that's what makes Portuguese a little different than other languages. But again, there are not too many examples with this, so if you have no idea, you would probably be safe going with an S. So let's look at some examples. With an S, we've got Savelia, very simple, an S at the beginning. With C, we've got cachaça, this C here is going to have a cedilla. So, of course, you don't have to worry about saying anything about the cedilla when you're spelling the word. So, it's just going to be a C when you say it. So, it's going to be C-A-C-H-A-C-A for cachaça. It's a hard one to say. Cachaça. So, you're going to have the C with the cedilla for that. Again, not too many words with that. So, S is probably the best bet here, but we always have to be on the lookout for these kind of exception rules and words that go along with those exceptions. Okay, so that's the S sound, and now we're going to go on to a sound that could actually fit in either the vowel category or the consonant category. I just put it in consonants because it just kind of makes more sense. The sound is wa. It's W and a schwa, wa. And this does happen quite often in Portuguese, but thankfully there's only one real way to spell it, which is UA, somewhat like Spanish and the other Romance languages, UA. This happens in the middle of the words usually. Example is guariba, G-U-A-R-I-B-A, guariba. And again, it's just going to be UA for wa. And usually this is going to come after another consonant, so whenever you hear the wa sound after another consonant, you can be pretty sure it's going to be a UA. Okay, so that's guariba. Okay, we are almost done with our consonant sounds. Couple more left, and these last ones are sort of interesting sounds. They're sort of unique to Portuguese. And the first one is the ly sound. It's pronounced lia. It's hard to pronounce it when it's not in a word because you're going to hear it in a word most often, but it's pronounced lia. It's a rare sound in Portuguese, actually. It's a rare sound, but it's spelled LH. There's only 2 words in the whole dictionary that spell it with LH, so it's a rare sound, but it's got an interesting spelling. It's spelled LH, and this is pretty typical of Portuguese. But again, there's only 2 words that utilize it, so 2 words, and those 2 words are, let me give them to you. Those 2 words are Savelia, which we just saw a couple minutes or even a couple seconds ago, Savelia, and Chocalho, which is spelled like this, Chocalho. chocalho. Again, we have the lia in there. Savelia, chocalho. But again, these are the only two words using that. So if you ever get one of these two words, it's going to follow this rule. Otherwise, you're probably not going to hear the sound at all. So very, very simple. Just know these two words for this rule. And our next rule is very similar to this one. It's the nya sound, nya, which is noted with the ny for the pronunciation, ny. So it's pronounced nya, and the rule is very much almost the same thing. It's going to be nh in Portuguese for the nya sound. Now this sound is very, very common in all Romance languages, like Spanish. It's usually that n with a tilde on top, like this, like piñata. But in Portuguese, we're not going to use just an N, we're going to use NH. And examples with this are senor, with an NH, senor, that's why you have our NH. Of course, senorita is probably another one. Just add ITA to this one. And also farinha. Okay, so senor, farinha. When you hear the nya sound, it's going to be NH. Now remember, there aren't too many words with this either, so there's very few words, so it's best to know those words. Okay, two more sounds left. The next one is a very interesting sound in Portuguese. It's the j sound, j, which is written with a zh, j. And in Portuguese, there's really only one way to spell this. It's going to be with a J. With the J. Portuguese, the J is usually going to represent the J sound, most of the time. An example is feijoada. I really like this word. Feijoada. Now, notice this isn't just like a normal J sound. It's not J. It's J. It's like the ZH, like garage. So feijoada, not feijoada. So again, whenever you hear the j sound in Portuguese, just spell it with the J and you'll be fine, as in feijoada. Okay, now next sound is definitely different in Portuguese. It's one of those, distinctive sounds, and it's a simple sound. It's sh. It's sh. And hopefully, with some examples we've seen already, you've noticed that there are a couple ways to spell this sound, and they're not very typical. The first one is an X, which is definitely not typical for the sh sound, but in Portuguese, a lot of the words, or not a lot, but some words use X. Actually, there's less than 10 entries in the dictionary that use X for the sh sound, so again, it's probably best to know those words. And an example is mashish. Mashish. It happens twice. Okay, there's an I. Mashish. So you've got your X for the sh sound in Portuguese, and that's a very, very interesting word. Nice one to know, mashish. But again, there are less than 10 words with, using the X for the sh sound, so it shouldn't be a big problem. The other way to spell this sound is CH, just like French. Remember, all these Romance languages are so connected, but usually when there's going to be a CH in a Portuguese word for the sh sound, usually it's been influenced by some other Romance language. And we'll take a look at some examples. The first one with CH is chamisa. Chamisa. So we got our CH there for the sh sound. Actually, this word is Portuguese, but it also comes from Spanish, and maybe that's why we have the CH. Another example is cachou, C-A-C-H-O-U. Now, this word looks very French because we've got that O-U for the U sound, we've got our CH, but again, it's Portuguese, but it stems from French. So maybe that's a reason why our CH is used for the sh sound. So remember, for Portuguese, the sh sound is going to be X or CH. X is not that common. You can look up all those words, and mostly it might be CH, especially if it comes from another language like French or Spanish, especially a Romance language. So those are the rules governing sh in Portuguese, and actually that concludes all of our consonant rules in Portuguese. So now we are done looking at vowel sounds and consonant sounds, and what we're going to do now is return back to our 10 sample words from Portuguese, and see if we can use all these rules and see why they're spelled the way they are. So I'm just going to put up those words, all 10 of them. The first one we had was capoeira. Capoeira. The second one was berimbau. Berimbau. There's a nasal sound there. Berimbau. Third one is Serengeiru, which we've seen in some examples. Serengeiru. Word number 4 was Savelia, which we have seen before as well. Savelia. Word number 5 was Kalema, which, if you remember, in the first video, I said this is sort of an exception to the rule, and hopefully you've spotted the exception, but we'll talk about it. The next word was Ipecac. Ipecac or Ipecac, but the first spelling is, or the first pronunciation is Ipecac. Next word is Frejo or Freja. Frejo or Freja. Cachaça, which we have seen. Cachaça. Caixinha. Caixinha. And Aratinga. Aratinga. So now we can go through each one of these words and see why they're spelled the way they are. Okay, so the first one, capoeira. First off, we see our K sound, and we know in Portuguese the K is going to be a C, especially if it precedes an A or an O. And because we have an A here, we know we're going to have an A because it's the A with 2 dots. It's the ah sound, so it's going to be an A. So we're going to have a C. Okay. Now P is pretty simple. It's going to stay the same. Here the schwa is going to be an O. Remember, it can be either, it can be any vowel, so here it's going to be an O. Now remember I said era, that A, the long A sound in Portuguese is usually going to be spelled with an E, but it could be EI, usually with words ending in EIRO or EIRA, which, if you remember, means someone who does in Portuguese. It's just like ER in English, so that's why we have EI here. And of course, the RA is part of that, so EIRA in total for the A sound. So that's capoeira. Okay, word number 2, berimbau. The B is normal, just like every other consonant. We have a long A sound here, and as I just said, the long A sound is usually going to be an E. And we don't have to worry about aero and era here, so we're going to go with an E. R is normal. Here we have a long E sound, pronounced E, which is going to be spelled with an I most of the time. That's why we have an I. Our M. Portuguese has a couple of nasal sounds. This is probably one of the few ones that does, and it's going to utilize an M for that nasal sound. So berimbau. So we have that nasal sound, and it's going to utilize an M here. Again, B is normal, and then we have an ow sound, which again is not very common in Portuguese. The sound isn't, but just like the other Romance languages, we're going to spell it with an AU. Okay, so that's berimbau. Okay, the next word is Serengeiru. We've seen this in a couple of examples. First off, we're going to have an S because that's the most common way to spell the sa sound. There isn't an A or an O, so we don't have to worry about our C with the cedilla. Okay, then we have a short E sound, which is going to be E. We have our normal R. Then we have the schwa with a dot on top, which is, mostly going to be an I. It's very similar to the short I sound. Okay, then we have our N, which is going to be the same. Now remember, we have our GU for the G sound, which we just went over, and this is also because there's an E after, especially that EI combination in a row, which we just talked about. So that's why, this all fits together. It's G-U-E-I-R-O. If you remember, the U sound at the end of many Portuguese words is spelled with an O, and that is the case here as well. The first pronunciation is Serengeiru, but the second one is Serengeiru. So, according to the rules, this should be O, and the alternate pronunciation will definitely help in figuring that out. Okay? Word number 4 is Savelia. Again, we're going to have our S here. There is an A, so, we have to be careful about the C with the cedilla, but here it's going to be an S. The schwa is an A. And then Velia, the VE is pretty normal. The V for the V sound, E for the short E sound, E. And then we just said that the lia sound is going to be LH. Remember, there are only two words with this. Savalia was one of them, so LH for that. And then we have schwa at the end, which is mostly going to be an A in Portuguese. Okay, the schwa at the end is mostly going to be an A in Portuguese. Okay, okay, now to our exception word. First off, you can see that we have a K, which is kind of like a no-no in Portuguese and other Romance languages. So that's a little exception about this word. It starts with a K. It's probably been influenced by other languages, and that's probably the reason why. But, that's the exception. It's usually supposed to be a C, but here it's a K. But we still have an A for the schwa. L is normal. We have our E for the long A sound, so it's A, spelled with an E. Then we have our normal M, and it ends in a schwa, and it's going to be spelled with an A, because most schwas at the end are spelled with an A. That's kalema. Okay. Ipecac, we have our short I sound, I, which is going to be I all the time. Our P is normal. Here we have a schwa with a dot on top and a long E sound. So, it can be either ipecac or ipecac. The typical way to probably spell this would be IPI, but here it's IPE, because remember, the long E sound can sometimes be an E, usually if it comes from other languages, so it can be an I or an E, and here it's an E. So you would just have to know the word. Cac, remember, we're going to use our C all the time for the K sound, and especially because it comes before an A, so we're going to use the C, and then we have a C to finish it off. And remember, the A sound, which is right here, is going to be spelled with an A. Okay, so that's ipecac or ipecac. Okay, word number 7 is Frejo or Freja. Here's another example of how alternate pronunciations can really, really help. First off, we know we're going to use an F because we like F. We don't really use PH that much in Portuguese. R is normal. Now here we have our A again. Here it's going to be EI, even if it's not, EIRO or EIRA. Here's one of the examples where it's EI for the A sound. Now we have the J. Remember the J sound is going to be spelled with the J, and that's the alternate pronunciation. So if you ask for the alternate pronunciation, you know this is going to be a J either way, if it's pronounced J or J. So it's definitely going to be a J, and then we have our O at the end to make sure it's an O. Now, probably the real pronunciation would be like Freju, because the O at the end, but maybe because this has been anglicized, it's been changed since it's been brought into English, it's Frejo, and also the alternate pronunciation is Freja. So that's, that for Frejo. Okay, we looked at cachaça. We know we're going to have our C before the A. That's how we spell the K sound usually. CH here is an example of the sh sound. Remember, it can be spelled with an X or a CH. CH is a little more common. So, this is why it's a CH. Maybe it comes from a French word, because French utilizes that. Then we have our A with two dots, which is going to be A most of the time. And here is the cedilla word. The C has a little cedilla at the end, which makes it soft. And because this is an A, because we know it's going to be an A, because it's a schwa, cachaça, we can use a C here. It could be an S, but here it is a C. It's one of those few words that uses the C with the cedilla. Okay, this caixinha, this word is very typical of Portuguese. First off, we have our K again, which is going to be C. Remember, the I sound, the long I sound in Portuguese is going to be AI almost all the time, and this word follows that, so AI. Then we have our sh sound, and this is one of the few examples that does use X for the sh sound, just like mashish. So caish, we've got caixinha, so the sh sound is X. Again, we have a long E sound, which is pronounced E. And remember, most of the time, this is going to be an I. So that's how it's, spelled in Portuguese most of the time, and that's the same in this word. Then we have our nya sound. Our nya sound, remember, is always going to be NH in Portuguese. That's really the only way to spell it. So again, we have our NH for the nya sound, and of course that schwa at the end, mostly going to be an A. So I think this is like the perfect Portuguese word. It encompasses a lot of the rules we have covered. So caixinha, very, very good word. And our final word is aratinga, which is pretty simple. We have an A sound at the beginning, which is going to be an A for sure. And then our R is normal. Here's another schwa. Remember, the schwa could be anything, could be any vowel, but usually it's an A in Portuguese. So that's why we have an A here. Then T for the t sound. We have a short I sound, I, which is going to be I all the time. So era t. And then we have our the inga is very, very sort of self-explanatory. It's the inga is going to be INGA, and that's why we have N and G for the nga sound, and the schwa at the end is an A. So again, it's a very simple word, but again, it's a very good Portuguese word. I think all of these words are very good Portuguese words, and now that we've gotten a taste of Portuguese, and you can hopefully sort of realize the rules of Portuguese and how they are applied in the language. Now remember, this is a Romance language, so if you have any doubt, you can pretty much connect some of the rules to the other Romance language rules and figure out the words this way. But Portuguese, again, is a very simple language, and it really does stick to its own rules, and we can see that with these 10 words.